Implementation. It may not be sexy, but requires a process handled to perfection. Eric Leeper and Andree Mohr sat down with me to talk all things implementation. Andree, Eric, wonderful to have you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's talk a little bit about what does implementation mean to you?
Everything. It honestly means everything to me and our firm. I think that strategy is so important, and having a strategic plan is so important, and that's what everybody talks about. But if there is no implementation, or I would call it execution, to the strategic plan, then you're never going to get to your goals.
Yeah, at FP Transitions, we think about implementation as being what happens after the deal documents are signed, right? Mm-hmm. So much press and energy gets spent on deal terms and talking about what the economics of a deal are, and they forget that once a deal is done, there's a working relationship that happens for 5, 10, 20, maybe even into perpetuity after the deal documents are completed. So we think about implementation as really the most important step of any M&A transaction. It's not the conversations that preceded, it's what happens day one of a completed deal.
That's absolutely true. It's all about the success of the deal. Comes down to the implementation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would say that when we think about success in a deal and what makes implementation easy, it's all of the work that we spend, or all of the time that we spend with our clients on understanding fit. You talk about having a strategy. When you're approaching a transaction, if you don't have a tight strategy, you can't clearly articulate your value proposition to a potential partner. So we use that value proposition as a means of determining fit. And I would say that the reason why most parties are not successful in their transaction or even in their search for a potential acquisition or merger, it's because they miss out on fit. And I would say largely it's because they do not have a clearly definable, executable strategy that they have a track record of implementing and executing on.
I totally agree. I wonder, you might hear the same thing, but we always say to advisors who want to acquire a practice, you need to make sure your practice is tight first, and you have processes, procedures, workflows in order to go out and be attractive for a buyer.
Absolutely, and I would say, especially in the environment that we've seen in M&A over the last maybe 5 to 7 years, there's so much liquidity and there's so much access to capital that you're not going to win purely on deal terms anymore. So if you can't, as we're going to hit this point a lot, and we have as an organization, if you don't have your house in order, you are very unlikely to be a successful acquirer or merger partner in this industry.
Andree, what would you say the most critical aspects of implementation are?
It's making sure that everybody understands their role, their responsibility, and how things are being executed. So as long as we know, I'm doing this, you're doing this, we can work together. How does that all flow? How does that all function? And we can hold each other accountable. That's really important to implementation. So we talk a lot about workflows. I love workflows. I think they're difficult for people to outline and build because you really have to get down to that nitty-gritty of who does what and hold people accountable. But when everybody's in it together, rowing in the same direction, that's how you're truly executing at a high level.
I would say, you mentioned accountability, and I would say that's the one that's most often overlooked when we talk about successful implementation. But I would also suggest that it's never as simple as do step A, do step B, do step C. You need to be thinking about contingencies, what happens in particular the more difficult parts of your strategic plan if they don't go well, because there's not going to be a consistent level of difficulty on all of your objectives, right? So be thinking about, if this happens, how are we going to react? That'll help you prepare. That'll help put people at ease when they're undertaking some more severe changes to the business, for lack of a better word. You want to be comprehensive in your thought process so that don't just expect it to be successful on your first try.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of work. It takes consistency. And to your point, I think that's where advisors get tripped up, is they think it's going to be A, B, C, D, and then we're done. Mm-hmm. There's so much other things around timelines and who does what that people need to think about. Mm-hmm. When that's strong, you can pivot and acquire another business and implement that really well.
Absolutely, and that's what we try to emphasize with the advisors who work with us, is that we've done thousands of transactions. A successful acquirer might do 1, 2, maybe 3 transactions in their entire business career. So understanding the lessons of all of the deals that came before it is crucial in being successful in this industry.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add one question here. Eric, can you talk to me a little bit about the concept of deal fatigue?
Yeah, so deal fatigue is something that we talk a lot about with our clients as they prepare to engage in these conversations. And deal fatigue, to put it bluntly, is what happens when a deal has gone on too long and you get too far in the weeds. And what happens is you start circulating ideas around what could be a very minor deal point, but because all of the big deal points have already been solved, the focus gets put on a fairly minor point, and it gets, to be frank, exhausting to go over the same point over and over again. And we have actually seen deals which have been 98% complete, be lost on the finish line because it just took too long, and people they get tired of making decisions, particularly around small issues. I'm very curious about what your experience is, Andree, with deal fatigue. I know you've done some acquisition work and you've worked with advisors who have done that, so I'm curious about what your perspective is.
Yeah, I mean, we try to tell people, especially the seller, to go into it knowing what they want, but being flexible to getting what's best for themselves and ultimately their clients. But then you do see people get caught up on these really small points within the deal, and they lose sight of the overall picture of what's going to happen and the relationship with that deal and the relationship of that advisor to their clients. So we see it happen a lot where, to your point, people get stuck on such a small portion of the deal that it ends up either blowing up the deal, or we finally get through that and people ultimately have a better relationship because they've worked through something that's a little bit more difficult and they've had the opportunity to be open and honest. But it's interesting. I'd love to hear your point of view on how you advise people when they're at the breaking point and they have lost sight of why they were doing this in the first place.
Well, it's particularly relevant to this conversation because it actually comes back to implementation. And I think about implementation as being something that is most successful when you have momentum. So once a deal is complete, you need to have energy, excitement going into that implementation and execution phase, right? So a lot of times what we try to do is we try to give the context and understand, hey, this is a small point. From a financial standpoint, it's fairly easy because we can actually put economic materiality around a decision. We were working on a deal where they were talking about what sort of fringe benefits would the partners have going into the new firm. And what it really came down to was about $10,000 each per person on a transaction that was over $20 million in combined economic value. So, we have to put things in material terms. We have to understand, is this an emotional issue? Is it a financial issue? And then, as I mentioned before, we're always trying to monitor what that speedometer is of the transaction. Are we losing speed? Are we losing momentum? Because you do not want to lose momentum right before a signing, because it puts tension much higher going into that implementation phase, and you're less likely to have a good experience post-transaction.
And that's what you guys do so well, is you bring perspective to the deals.
Thank you.